fully autonomous as well as self-driving technologies are typically not aligned with what people think they can actually do. I think Americans don't view safety as a high priority as other cultures do. Nuclear power as well. I think nuclear power is also incredibly green. Most people don't realize that. I think people think of Chernobyl and they think, oh my gosh, or Fukushima.
Okay, Jim, hi. Nice to meet you again. We just talked about it when the camera was still off, that we've met before, or that you've heard my voice before, I guess. And yeah, you've been using our product for a long time, so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into today. And I'm going to put this up again because I just did it the first time. I love that. I knew this was going to be the case. So again, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
I looked at your CV a little bit when I, of course, started doing research, and I knew that we were going to do a podcast today. And you didn't always work in the automotive sector, or at least you didn't start out in the automotive sector. So you basically come from more of a public health, I think, and even medicine kind of background.
You did your research.
I did. I kind of was stalking you.
That's impressive.
I hope that's okay.
No, it's totally fine. Yeah, I actually got 2 master degrees, one in public health and the other one is in HCI, human-computer interaction. And yeah, I was a trained health behavior and health education educator. I have a certificate in motivational interviewing, which is a technique social workers and health practitioners can use to encourage behavior change. It comes really in handy in meetings when you're trying to convince somebody to do something.
Also with your students now.
Also with my students now, yep. It comes in really handy. I can really motivate them to do better in class, so yeah. Absolutely.
Nice. Now, since you didn't really start out as a UX designer, I guess, or researcher, or that is something that you kind of went into later on, what made you take that step after all of going into the automotive industry? Was that a certain decision you made on purpose, or was it something that just organically evolved over time?
It's the latter. I started working for ad agencies in Detroit. Detroit has a huge agency culture that's incredibly successful. It kind of goes hand in hand with the automotive industry. And so I wanted to change up my career a little bit and work with a bunch of creative people. And I was recruited to join some ad agencies I would say a couple years after graduate school, doing UX work. And I happened to work on some automotive products. I also had a chance to work for some really cool companies like Spotify, doing some of their demo work. And the automotive companies noticed. And then I got a call from another old classmate and colleague to join the in-vehicle team at General Motors.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my transition.
That's nice. Now, how did you think that your background, not coming from the automotive industry originally, does that help you in UX design, or do you have a different approach to UX design than other people might have?
You know, to be perfectly blunt, automotive UX design has really only existed for pretty much the past 10 years. And so nobody's really come from it. To be perfectly honest, my background has just trained me to be a good listener. And I think that's incredibly vital and important in UX design. You have to listen to people. You have to be able to be empathetic. You have to be able to acknowledge when something's wrong. And I think those are some key foundation behaviors we all have to kind of accept going into this field. When I worked with the team at GM, very few people were still in automotive. And those that were incredibly eager to learn about UX because they came from color and trim or manufacturing, which was just far off from UX sometimes as my health background. And so we were kind of an amalgam of different backgrounds coming together. Some had been with General Motors for 30 years and had several different careers within the company and just wanted to be a part of the creative team. So it really has only really existed in my mind for the last 10 years with this kind of huge boom of virtual experiences and the connectivity we have with 5G and all that kind of stuff.
Now, as someone who worked for GM for a long time and obviously also now as a lecturer at the University of Michigan, right? What do you tell students when they ask you what stands out in terms of in-vehicle experience when we compare, for example, North America and Europe or different markets in general?
Actually, the one that stands out the most is the one actually you didn't mention, which is Asia. A lot of, yeah, so I would say the biggest ones that I'm really seeing are what the Asian markets are doing. I think the North Americans are actually laggards, if I'm being totally honest. I think the Europeans are I say a close second to Asia, especially the stuff that I'm seeing using your website, actually, using your tools. We're very conservative when it comes to our designs. We really want to hold onto our heart control buttons as much as we possibly can, especially for our trucks. But the Asian market, especially the Chinese and the Koreans, and are really, really into virtual experiences that are really pushing the envelope. A lot of my students are international. 60% of my students are international, which means they are not native to the United States. The majority are from India and China when you're looking at that 60%. And so they're really inspired by their home cultures and they bring that into the classroom. And so when we use your tools in class, a lot of the examples that they talk about are not from North America. They're actually from Europe and from Asia.
Now, what would you say are the biggest differences? So every time I look at our database, for example, obviously when I'm doing onboardings or when I'm talking to clients and they ask me, what are the differences or how could you compare different infotainment systems or how do they differ? Something that I always find interesting is obviously American infotainment systems, they always have I would say probably a very classic look.
Yeah,
It seems like they haven't changed a lot in the last couple of years. Like you said, a lot of heart knobs, heart buttons, heart keys, anything
yep,
that is kind of tangible, I guess.
absolutely.
Does this also stem from the fact that Americans want their cars to be very reliable? They just want to see what they know. They want to use what they know, and they're not willing as much to try out new technology. Is that something that also comes with culture, or?
I think it's a culture thing. So the being from Detroit, I've pretty much grown up around cars my entire life. For those who don't know, Detroit has pretty much been the manufacturing hub for the automotive industry since its inception, since its beginnings. The original automakers had the largest assembly lines in the world at the time. In the 1950s, General Motors was the largest company in the world, period, and stop. They manufactured everything from refrigerators to cars. And so when these companies are very much ingrained and have a culture and have multiple generations of people working for them, they like the way they work and they don't like to change them. In fact, if you look at the F-150, if you could argue that design really hasn't changed drastically in the last 30, 40 years, to be perfectly honest, compared to some other brands that are out there. I think it's a culture thing. I think that we all like to pretend that we're blue collar workers with gloves and like to use hard knobs. And so the biggest use case I saw a lot was a lot of my colleagues were like, well, I can't touch that if I had gloves on. And I kind of would sometimes be like, when was the last time you had gloves on? But no, I think that a lot of the customers of the big three. So if I'm being really specific, Ram, Chevrolet, and then obviously Ford. A lot of our customer base are blue collar workers, and they really care about durability. And there's the sense that if you introduce more technology, it becomes less reliable, which, if I'm being totally transparent, can sometimes be the case when you're going through the elements, going through extreme cold, which is very much the case in Michigan. It can really affect the performance of the technology. And so when it comes to heart control buttons, there's that sense that it kind of conveys more reliability. Whether that's actually the case based on data, I think you can make the argument maybe a little bit, but I think the technology has become better where the reliability is being elevated. But yeah, no, I can't imagine anybody pulling up to a construction road site in a Cybertruck. I'll be totally blunt. I don't think that's not their target market. I don't think any construction worker, even if they can afford an $80,000 GMC Sierra Denali, they would never buy a Cybertruck. And it's because of the reliability, the durability, and the build quality of the overall product. But also, actually, it's the infotainment system. They need to be able to drive it when it's minus 10 degrees, or if we're talking Celsius, if it's 0 degrees Celsius, they want to be able just to pull right in, and shift into it and have all the gloves and the Carhartt gear they could possibly want and not worry about it. So Yeah, I think it's definitely a culture thing for sure. That was a very long-winded answer to the to your question, but I think it's definitely a culture thing for sure.
So, does that maybe make Europeans kind of a middleman? Because I'm guessing that Europeans, especially Germans, are
Yeah,
obviously the type of people that, they want reliable systems, they want reliable cars. We've been doing this the same way for 50 years and we're not going to change it. But then again, Europeans are very much prone to new technology, especially when they feel like it enhances certain features like safety or
yeah,
comfort. Why isn't that the case for Americans, for example? Because she said obviously cars should be reliable. They
it's a
should have a
great
very,
question.
they should work. Cars should work. Cars should do what they want them to do. How does this differ from Europeans?
So if something works and works well, I think Americans don't view as safety as a high priority as other cultures do, to be perfectly honest. I don't. I think if we want a certain type of performance out of a vehicle, we're willing to give up safety quite a bit. Jeep Wrangler is a good example of this. That is, I think, a great vehicle, but it has a very high tip ratio, which means if you're on a certain angle, it'll tend to tip over. I don't think Europeans would ever want to buy that type of vehicle, even though it's a smaller SUV, it's a smaller
Hmm.
crossover. Um, I think it's because we like that excitement. We like to live on the edge of our seat a little bit. I think that as Americans, we tend to want the thrill. We want to feel the G-force slightly as we kind of
Yeah.
accelerate, um, or be able to very easily go over a dirt mound, and we care more about the clearance than the potential tip ratio. I will say too, though, it is a bit, I don't know if geographical is the right term, but as Americans, a lot of car buyers, especially those that have these very, I would say, unsafe vehicles that are larger SUVs, they live in off dirt roads. They live in, I would say, more terrain and have a lot more land than most Europeans do. I've spent significant time in Europe. I lived in London for 4 months. I've been to Germany twice. Um, I've been all over the UK, and what's very apparent is that roads are very much narrow. They are very much more centralized in public transportation, and the sense of ownership of a car when it comes to being able to put everything you own in it and then go somewhere is not really a thing. Whereas Americans, we like the ability to, throw all of our kids in the back seat, put a bunch of luggage in, maybe some tents, and then drive up north. And
Drive for
that's very
hours.
drive for hours. It is very much, we love making movies about it. We love making road trip movies. And I think that's kind of the appeal to it is we want that ability to do that. And I think that if we give up safety to get that sense of, I think it gets overused, but the sense of freedom.
Hmm.
Um,
I wasn't
uh,
going to say it, but you
no,
said it.
no, no, I'll say it. I'll say it. It's true. That sense of freedom, I think it's very much a real thing. And this isn't even a political thing either. I really think that a lot of people want that sense of it, where we can put everything in our car and then drive up north. It's a very common thing in the United States.
But do you think that this mindset has shifted a little bit or it's slowly shifting? Because obviously you can't really keep yourself from, I guess, advanced technology at some point because there's going to be people that are interested in it or that want to drive cars that have more specific or enhanced in-vehicle experience. Is that something that
I
you think
definitely think
American
so.
companies have to go with the flow at some point?
They're going to. And what's so interesting is that they're actually not all going with the flow. Some of them are actually being quite innovative in ways that I don't think people realize. So, and this is actually where I think Americans are leading. We definitely, we're actually very safe when it comes to technology. So, and I think in some of the off-road and some of the performance vehicles, I don't think they're as safe when it comes to safety ratings as European brands or Asian brands. But one thing we are very safe with is technology. We're incredibly safe. So I think Ford Blue Cruise and GM Super Cruise, and
Hmm.
then we've seen what's happening with Tesla, and I think those two brands have actually exceeded even Tesla's self-driving features because of its really emphasis on safety. Because they have a customer base that doesn't typically trust technology, whereas Tesla's customer base, which actually is a minority, believe it or not, when it comes to the broader American demographic market of car
Hmm.
buyers, um, they really want to make sure that it's safe to use. And so there's all this emphasis now on it. And but both those two major companies who are leading, I think, in the hands-free driving technology have really put an emphasis on that and are actually leading in my mind. So I think the shift is definitely happening, but I think that in some areas, the Americans are actually leading. I think I would say, from a European standpoint, uh, Mercedes is also, I think I would easily put them right up against Ford and General Motors when it comes to that. And so I think that there is going to, it's a shift, but it's not so much us coming up to the Europeans and the Asians.
Mm-hmm.
It's in some areas, especially hands-free technology, in my professional opinion, Americans are leading just as much. But do we have a fancy interface to kind of showcase as much? I don't think so, because our customers typically don't necessarily need a huge screen that's in the middle. They like to have a driver display or a smaller driver display, and then some heart control buttons. So I think when you look at CES, it sometimes not doesn't get as much press because it's not as exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we're very much leading though, and I think that there is that shift, especially in hands-free technology. So yeah, I had the chance to work with the Corvette team a little bit, and I
Nice.
can tell you from a performance standpoint, they will say that they're one of the global leaders in performance when it comes to just simply automobiles, and I definitely put them up against any European brand when it comes to performance as well. So yeah, I think from a technology adoption standpoint, to go back to your question, I think yes, there is that shift, and I think as millennials get older, where we have more spending power, when we have more of the ability to dictate what goes into cars, we're definitely a part of that shift for sure.
So I'm guessing design is less is more, and then you put an emphasis on a different or a focus on different parts of the car then. So
Yes, definitely. Well, less is more. Less is also cheaper.
true, true.
Yeah, it's less is cheaper, and it's not just. I think Braun design and Dieter Rams definitely influenced a lot of Americans, and a lot of Americans who do car design. But the main driving factor is not just that it looks really good, but also it's cheaper. So
That's always, I mean, price is always a very, very big point for people to buy a car or to decide which car to buy. So I think that's the same in every single country. I think I read an article the other day and it said that price is still the biggest
it is.
influence on whether to buy a car or which car to buy. So yeah, that makes sense.
Price is actually, in my mind, the biggest barrier right now to EV adoption, and then it's charging infrastructure. I think when just kind of piggybacking a little bit into price a little bit, yeah, I think especially as the evolution of the automotive industry is changing to EVs, I think it's definitely becoming one of those things where, yeah, we'd have to get cheaper with our cars, and we're doing everything we can to do that.
Now, obviously we mentioned two big players, which is obviously European brands. Then we had US, obviously, and then you already mentioned them, China. Now, if we talk about the design of HMI experience or just designing infotainment systems, what do you think is different with Chinese design? What is the main difference between all those markets, or what do they do better, or what is very significant about it?
It's significant in the fact that they're really going all virtual. They're really are not concerned about heart controls. They're not concerned about traditional graphics. I think in the American brands especially, we definitely stand with the minimalist designs. I think Europeans are very much this way too. When you compare an Audi to, I would say, any GM vehicle, they're actually quite similar. So if you compare, when it comes to the aesthetics and the designs, in my mind, Audi, Mercedes, and then a little bit into, I would say, Cadillacs now, especially the latest stuff that came out with the Cadillac Lyriq. You can see some I think some similarities. When you start comparing them to the European brand or the Asian brands, Neo stands out a little bit. I would say that they're pushing the envelope any way they can virtually. They have typically more animation-based graphics. Asian brands love their characters. They love their personalities, which is kind of funny because when you think of like the traditional Americans, we typically are the ones that are almost borderline rude a lot of the time. We like to voice our opinion. We like to shout. We like to be adventurous and very opinionated. With the cultural norms, I think, though, in China is very interesting, where if you look at a lot of their interfaces, they have characters. They have little animation characters, and they have interactive elements with a lot of lighting, a lot of color variations. To the point where sometimes you almost feel like you're at a mini theme park. Like it's very interesting. And I got to give kudos to them. They're really trying to push the envelope and play to their audience. And I think that's what they're experimenting with. The thing you also have to remember too is that their economies are booming. Their market for car ownership has really only existed for the past 30 years or so, unlike Americans, where it's pretty much been the last 100. Same thing with Europeans. And so they're trying to experiment because they have no mental models, they have no norms as a culture. And they have a ton of technology, especially the Chinese. They have a lot of technology, and they have just as much manufacturing prowess as we do in the United States. So,
Yeah, every time I look at Chinese infotainment systems, they all have something very tablet-like, or I guess smartphone-like.
yeah,
So that is obviously not the case, or not as much with European cars, but every
yep,
time I look at a Chinese car, this is very much the case. It's very colorful. It's supposed to be very easy to use, I guess, something that you've seen before using your tablet, your smartphone. And then something that you mentioned also, this heavy focus on virtual assistants, or
yeah,
for example, the Neo that has this little figure that even
on
has
the
face
top there.
movements. And yeah, do you think that is something that will at some point hit the European and US market as well? Or is that something that will probably ultimately only be important for the Chinese market? Because then again, customers are very, very different in that type of case.
I think it's going to hit the European market before it hits the United States market. I think it'll be like a niche. If I was to pick a brand that might experiment with it, maybe like Mini Cooper. Um, I can't see the Italians ever using it. Um, I really can't. And like with Tata Motors, like with Land Rover Jaguar, I really can't see them using it ever. I think those are very traditional, elegant brands, and I don't think you would want it to potentially tarnish that elegance. Um, like I said, maybe Mini, um, but even then, I think it's a stretch. Yeah, and especially with looking at the German brands, Audi, Volkswagen, uh, maybe Volkswagen, but I think yeah, and the Americans, I think I'm trying to think of one. I take that. You know what? I take that back. I think Rivian may experiment with it. Rivian has what's a really cool. I know the Europeans and the Asian markets haven't had a chance to really experience Rivians that much yet, but they have these cool characters that come up in these cool cartoons
Oh
that
yeah,
actually
it's
kind of
isn't the little
proliferate.
fuzzy wuzzy?
It's a little fuzzy wuzzy kind of bear creature that kind of
Exactly.
goes
Yeah.
along the interface, and it's pretty creative. I happen to actually had a chance to meet some of the creative members of their team, and all of them have kids, and all of them wanted this kind of homey figure that's adventurous, and so I could see Rivian doing something like that for sure. We do have Amazon Alexa, and I know that is a lot of automakers are experimenting with Amazon Alexa. Whether or not they put a face to the voice, I don't know. I know that if Michael B. Jordan were to come onto your screen and all of a sudden start talking as Alexa, yeah, I could see that maybe happening. But yeah. Um, but I think for the most part, yeah, I think Rivian may play around with it, but it's only brands that have some sort of cartoon character that I could think of. The only one that stood out to me is maybe Rivian.
Yeah, I think also that, or something that I've seen a lot is Chinese automakers or vehicle makers, they use a lot of third-party applications. For
Yeah,
example, if we're looking at navigation system, it's most of it is third-party applications, while European
yeah,
and US automakers mostly have their own system. And in China, it seems like most of it is based on third-party applications in some type of way, whether it's entertainment or whatever it
very
may
true,
be.
very true.
Is that
I no, I was just gonna say, well, most Americans we typically use Google Maps, and so and that's because just the navigation system I think is the leader in the industry. But no, China doesn't have Google when it comes to Google Maps, and so they have this kind of freedom to use other third-party services. I will say this too, because Spotify has also done a great job. I'd say in the United States too, to using as a music player. Apple's also penetrated too with Apple Music. So I think when it comes to third-party apps, I think Chinese have definitely done a great job with that. But I think that as Americans, companies especially, can see the automotive vehicle as like a channel, similar to a phone, they'll
mhm.
start working directly with automotive companies to just basically have their app available directly on the vehicle, as opposed to having to go through Apple CarPlay and Android Auto.
Do you think that those type of third-party applications, is that something that is not as popular in the US and Europe, simply because of, I guess, safety reasons or legal reasons? Because I guess a lot of users are they're afraid that their data is going to get leaked or personal information is going to be spread with third-party applications. Do you think that is also a reason, or is it just not, has it not been as popular using third-party applications so far?
I just think that the majority of Americans don't typically, besides Tesla and maybe Rivian, I don't think that a lot of brands have done a great job of kind of emphasizing the technological capabilities of the vehicle. Also, I haven't seen a lot of great third-party apps just being developed, to be perfectly frank. I just think that they're not, the UX isn't great when I've seen them. And so I think that it's just the design itself is not that useful. And so the ones I've seen as a leader, as pure third parties, probably Spotify, just because they've worked directly with Rivian and with Tesla and also with General Motors and Ford to actually have like a built-in Spotify app. And it works really well because most people have used Spotify. They take their same interface, the same mental model that they have on their website, and then just apply it directly into the app, and people know how to use it. And that's just because of great UX and great developments. I just think, yeah, I think the Chinese third-party companies have just done a better job, just out designing. And I think that if they do, and I don't think it's a data thing. I don't think anybody's worried about stealing data when you're just listening to music, or even navigation too. It's pretty much well known that if you're using a third-party navigation system or a service like OnStar, people know that some other company knows exactly where you are. So when it comes to data sharing or data privacy, I don't think that's ever really concerned about stealing data or privacy concerns or that kind of thing. I think people kind of acknowledge the fact that the age of smart vehicles, if you're using one, people know where you are.
I did the last podcast I did, or the first one I did, I was talking to the chief designer of Lincoln Co., and we were talking a little bit about different designs also and vehicle as a third space kind of.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that is something that is very Chinese, seeing a vehicle as a third space, as maybe as an extension to your regular life, spending a lot of time in there, then having entertainment and music and movies and so on. Is that something that you would think would be interesting for different markets as well?
Only specific markets. So I've definitely talked to enough designers at GM where they're thinking the same way, but it's typically only ultra luxury vehicles. I think the mass majority of Americans, and other, especially Europeans too, they don't really, I think the idea of a third space, because I hear that term a lot, I don't think it's going to catch on to people think they will. I think that because that, just for those who don't know, the third space is the idea that you can use a fully autonomous vehicle to basically create a movable living room where you can have a TV, you can have a gaming system, you can have a couch where you can face somebody else, almost like a kitchen table. I think that it's going to be incredibly expensive, and so I think that that's going to isolate some markets right off the bat. But I think that the idea of a livable space should pivot to a more economic friendly option for people with accessibility issues. And I think that's where the money should be spent, not on trying to make more people entertained as they're being fully taxied. Now, do I think there'll be a market for it? Yes. But I think it'll be kind of more of an Uber-like experience, like a ride-hailing service, as opposed to a living room, where I think more companies like Uber and Lyft will purchase them and then use them as opposed to having drivers. So I think that's a better market for them, as opposed to just kind of selling this as almost like a ultra-rich, movable living room. I don't know. I think in the automotive industry, we like to get excited about a lot of technology, but what ends up becoming is just an ultra-rich, expensive thing that very few people buy. And I think that we need to pivot ideas like that to identify more needy populations, such as safer rides for people using Lyft and Uber, and then more accessible, friendly rides for people who have accessibility limitations. That's kind of my take on it.
Now, do you think that as a UX designer, do you think that different markets can learn from each other?
Oh, I hope to God they do. I hope to God they do. No, I sincerely mean that. No, I really do.
Sounds like you've been trying for years.
They have, yes. I think more Americans should take a page out of what the Asian markets are doing. I think, and I know that the Americans have been learning from Europeans all the time. For example, when the Corvette team typically, and Tesla did this too, when we test performance, we go to Nürburgring.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a famous racetrack in Europe, for those who don't know what that is. And that is the gold standard for performance timing. We don't go to Daytona. I'll put it this way. Americans have probably more racetracks than I can name. We especially love Formula One now. Obviously, the thing in Vegas is going on right now. And yet, where a lot of the automakers benchmark their performance vehicles as like a global standard of performance and lap times is Nürburgring. Um, and so that I think right there is a perfect example for how we're learning from Europeans and comparing us to other European companies. I think actually the learning though has gone on for a while, especially in the performance space. I think of the movie Ford versus Ferrari, where we basically took a page out of Ferrari's book. And then with the Germans too, I think when it came to the advent of the original automobile, going back as far back then, we learned it from the Germans. Henry Ford didn't invent the car. He simply created the assembly line to make it massively available to everybody and affordable. And then obviously engine engineering. I think the Japanese have done an amazing job showing how an economical and environmentally friendly gasoline-based engine can still have great performance. And so I think we've learned a ton from that as well. And so the learning is definitely happening. I just wish it would go beyond engineering and into the infotainment space. I think that a lot of the times we like to benchmark Tesla when it comes to kind of good HMI and good UX.
Yeah.
But I think there's enough companies out there that have nothing to do with Tesla that are in other markets that we should take a page out of. For example, I was really impressed with Mini when they debuted their circular kind of graphic where they basically doubled down on their freeform circular display and created this very rich personality infotainment system with very basic features. I think they killed it. And I think a lot of automakers should take note that it is still very possible to create an amazing user experience with a circular display as opposed to a rectangular one. And I think Apple, for example, should take a page out of that and basically say, hey, you know what? I still think you can create a great product without having to basically just take your phone and mimic it, because it was very much a great reflection of their brand. And I thought they did a great job. And I know there are automotive companies looking very closely at what Mini did because it surprised a lot of people.
Now, what do you think is the reason that so many people sleep on different brands but look so closely at what Tesla is doing?
The personalities of the CEOs.
Oh, you think so?
Yep. I think that Elon has done a great job getting press, and I think he's gotten a lot of attention. He's also got a huge fan base. And so I think a lot of people like to envy him and put him on a pedestal and say, hey, what he's doing is great. I think Tesla has created a fantastic benchmark to show how possible it is to create an incredibly profitable EV that has the ability to do over-the-air updates where you can constantly revise what you're doing. And I think that's something that Tesla did. When it comes to actual design and HMI design, I think that a lot of people like to sleep on other brands because they don't get as much press and they simply just don't even know about them. And I think that as Americans too, we're very much isolationists, and so we always like to concentrate on the brands that we have. And because a lot of brands aren't available to us, we simply don't know they exist. And so when it comes to benchmarking, it's hard to think of something that we don't even know is out there. And I see that a lot with my students, where a lot of the Chinese students will bring in a company that none of the American students have ever heard of, and they're like, whoa, wait, what is this? Wait, it can do just as much as this? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, oh, okay. And so it kind of, a lot of light bulbs start going off when comparing notes. And it's because the Americans simply just don't know they're out there. And all they hear about is Elon doing this or Elon going to Mars, and they immediately associate that with Tesla. And so I think that's why. But, well, no, credit to Tesla. They have a mass market EV that's very, very affordable, and that has great performance. And so that's why it gets used a lot, because it's in the news a lot.
So it's good marketing.
Yes, putting a Tesla Roadster on a rocket ship and sending it into space, I have to admit, was a pretty good idea. And
why did no one think of that?
Because it's really expensive. But no, I think it did it. I mean, what's great is I think Tesla gets a bunch of free marketing. I think GM is after working there, GM does a great job putting their cars in movies, like
Hmm.
Barbie, I think is a great example of that. But yet more people talk about Tesla and the rocket ship, I feel like, than saying the Hummer in Barbie.
I guess
Yeah.
controversial marketing is not the worst thing in the world after all.
It's not. I wish it were the case. I wish that as Americans we sometimes were feeling more outside the box. But I think that we definitely have we definitely acknowledge Europeans a lot more when they're doing something good. I think Audi and Mercedes are good examples of this. I think like Audi and for performance, I know that gets used a lot. Obviously for performance too, the Italian brands. But not once when I was in a meeting was a Chinese brand ever mentioned for doing something good. And I think that's because it wasn't necessarily done on purpose. It was simply that they just weren't even aware of it. They weren't even, they just didn't, never looked. They didn't even know that they were doing something cool until somebody mentioned it. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I can't read Mandarin, so I can't see what they're saying, but it
Hmm.
looks okay. It looks good. But then that's it. It usually stops right there. And so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, but I do think that Tesla has been very popular worldwide. So that's not only American market, that's also in
That's
Europe.
true. That's
I would
true. That's
definitely
a good
say,
point.
yeah. But obviously, this is a very evolving sector, and it's not only about in-vehicle experience, but you also mentioned it, of course, EVs. So, in the words of William Shakespeare, to buy or not to buy an EV. Now, why do you think are Americans slower to adopt EVs than Europeans? Because you mentioned it earlier. I think it was
Yeah.
pricing, obviously, not enough charging stations, maybe range anxiety. What do you think are the reasons for that?
So there's two big ones, like I mentioned. There's price, and then there's also charging infrastructure. So my friends who can afford an EV but choose not to buy one, their primary concern is charging infrastructure. We're simply not getting enough subsidies nor enough money invested into the charging infrastructure that's happening. Tesla owners will be the first one to acknowledge this too, because a lot of Tesla charging stations are now getting overused, and they're seeing the long lines because Tesla's done such a great job of maintaining them and making sure they're working correctly. So it's not only that there's not enough of them, but the ones that are available are constantly breaking down, and so they just get frustrated because they can't find one. Um, and then the second one is price. There's only, I want to say, a handful of EVs that are under $40,000, like genuinely under
Hmm.
$40,000 before our tax incentive kicks in. And so the average American simply can't afford it. And I think that's a huge barrier. And I think a lot of Europeans that do purchase EVs, I think Norway is a perfect example of this. Their median income is a lot higher than Americans, so they can afford EVs. So when it comes to an overall general population of people, their overall cost of living is very comparable from what they make on an average income, and so they can afford it. Um, and Americans aren't like that, unfortunately. And so that's probably been the adoption there. I also think too, politics unfortunately has played a huge role in this, and I think it doesn't get discussed enough. I think that a lot of political candidates have tried to say that it's not necessarily a driver of climate change, or that climate change is not as dire as I think other people would make it out to be, which is really unfortunate because I can tell you that every automaker actually truly believes climate change is real,
Hmm.
even the top leadership. And so it's not that the automakers don't believe it. And so yeah, I think that has something to do with it as well. My funniest story is when I was being asked the same question actually by a potential buyer of a Silverado 1500, which is a and and they were like, well, I'm thinking about getting a 2500 or a 1500. And I said, well, if you ever thought about getting the new electric Silverado, it can go 400 miles of range and tow pretty decently. And they just laughed at me. And I said, why would you laugh? It's a great truck. I actually know the engineering is pretty sound. And they're like, well, no, that's just a hipster car. Like also too, that's a fade. That's a fade. That's just going to go away.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think so. And they said, yeah, well, they're just doing that for tax credits. And I'm like, no, we're building now more assembly lines with them, and there's more auto workers now that are almost for EVs as there are for ICE vehicles. And they said, well, you don't believe that the leadership actually believes all this climate change stuff, do you? And I said, I know for a fact they do. And what do you think is funding this EV stuff? We're taking the money that, okay, so just, and I told him, I said, if you buy this $50,000 truck, we're going to take the profit and invest it into the EV batteries. Like that's going to happen. And they kind of laughed, they shrugged it off, but I could tell they didn't bite back. I kind of got them thinking a little bit. They ended up not buying an EV truck, but they said that they thanked me later on and said, okay, I'm now realizing this is more real than I thought. And yeah, I think it's unfortunately very political, and that's the third reason. And I think it's very unfortunate because I think that it's going to be my generation and my students' generation who are really going to feel it if we don't do something.
Also, what I read is, for example, in Europe, you have a lot of, I think it's ride sharing, where you can basically rent a vehicle somewhere in the city, and that's mostly electrical vehicles, and you drive around. That's probably something that you don't have in the US, which is apparently an incentive for a lot of people, just because it's not their EV, so they can just take it and drive it somewhere and then put it back. Is that something that might help people to get used to driving EVs or make it more, I guess, something they could imagine doing?
And the major cities like Los Angeles and New York, I can see them doing, but not for the rest of the country. And the reason being is that a lot of people like to be protective of their stuff. And I think that especially with cars, it's a very personal thing. So that ability to kind of rent it out and to try it, I think maybe for the tech people, that are like wanting to brag about their vehicle, I could see them doing it. But for the mass amount of people willing to adopt it, I think there'd be some resistance. Now, I think the biggest way you convince people to have an EV is to lower the cost and increase the infrastructure and the reliability of that infrastructure. Just those two things. And then, because I think that the education around climate change and the performance of EVs is getting around. You just need to fix those two things. And then I think you'll see that adoption going forward.
So I think another point that a lot of people make is range anxiety. They're just morally afraid they're not going to get to the supermarket 10 kilometers away because who knows? So a very extreme example. But I do believe that a lot of people feel like if they're driving to Italy from Germany or wherever, they're going to get to about 300 miles. And then what are we going to do? No rechargers, nothing to do. We're going to have to wait for 2 hours until the car is charged. What can you tell those people? How can you, I guess, make them feel better about EVs?
So I actually will tell you exactly the same thing I told a dealer association when we were giving a presentation to basically train dealers on how to educate customers. So I'll tell you the same thing I told them, which is ask them what their day and day like. Ask them what their vacations are like. Ask them what they would like to do on a road trip. Ask them how frequently they go on those road trips. The average person, I could say in the United States, and I'm sure the same cases in Europe, is they typically will take 2 road trips a year, probably at most. And I would say to them, okay, here's your map, and pull up a map. Basically use Google Maps and pull up how many charging stations there are along the way, and to have them see and show them how many charging infrastructures there are. Show them the data. Don't try to sell them on anything. Oh, this is my dog, Bo, by the way.
He's beautiful. I didn't want to mention it, but I love dogs. Just putting it out there.
Thank you. Bo would like to know what's going on, but that is Bo, my dog.
He looks very happy.
Thank you. So I would say just show them the actual data. And I would say if you're really concerned about it, I would consider, if it's really remote, so in northern Italy, in your case, or if it's in, any kind of more remote part of the United States or Canada, I would say consider renting a car, and then and try to and do it that way if you're really concerned about it. But because 95% of your driving is much more economical for an EV, that's the selling point, and not the idea of a road trip, which really is only going to be less than 5% of your actual driving.
Now, the elephant in the room question obviously is, and that's a discussion that's been going on for a long time, are EVs really greener than combustion cars? Because, that's
a great question.
You have people coming on with, but batteries, manufacturing batteries is terrible, and why would you even drive an EV? So what would you tell these people?
So yes and no. I would say that it depends how your energy company is getting its energy, one. So are they being carbon neutral? Are they relying on solar panels, wind turbines, and also, I hate to say it, but it's true, nuclear power as well. I think nuclear power is also incredibly green. Most people don't realize that. I think people think of Chernobyl and they think, oh my gosh, or Fukushima. And so do they rely on those three things versus coal or natural gas? The second thing too, though, is that right now, because of the way batteries are manufactured, you have to ensure that the manufacturing facility is also carbon neutral as well for the batteries themselves. And so how those batteries are sourced. The companies are getting there. So right now, I would say it's still about an even split. It's not, I would say, as environmentally friendly as a lot of people make it out to be, but it's definitely more environmentally friendly the more people do it. Because the more people do it, the more the companies that are doing this are incentivized to keep on doing it. And therefore the companies will make more money. The reason why the GM EV1, which is now 2 different Netflix documentaries, why GM killed the electric car was because it wasn't profitable. And it was simply just too expensive. They're also using lead-based batteries, which I promise you is not very environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't sustainable, both financially and also environmentally. And so in my opinion, they were actually right to kill it. But I think that to answer your question, it needs more time. You need to keep buying them so that you're incentivizing the companies to keep making them because they'll make more money at scale. The more you make, the more of them you make, the more money that you can make from them. And the more incentivized the energy companies are to provide environmentally friendly features. I think if you're going back to your previous question about the range anxiety, I would say if you're on the fence, buy hybrid. There are some amazing hybrids out there, especially for truck buyers and for large SUVs. And for Europeans, there's some amazing hybrids that I think are better than some of the top in the market that I can think of. And so I would say that's also a great option that can be just as environmentally friendly depending on how much you drive. If you drive a lot, I'm thinking like probably 30,000 miles or 45,000 kilometers a year, get a hybrid. Don't get an EV. You're going to rely much more heavily on charging infrastructure, and you're going to hate it most likely. And with a hybrid, you can still use normal petrol or gas stations. And I would say you're going to be much more happier with the product and still be environmentally friendly.
My dad would be so happy. He tried to explain this logic to me, just like you did now. I'm going to show him this. Be like, you were right.
Just as long as you can give him a Michigan football shirt as well.
Yes, I'm going to stick with this, though.
You're going to stick with this. Okay.
Yeah, well, I already bought him an Ohio State shirt, so I can't go back now. God. He's going to be confused. Okay. He's 71. Well.
Oh, man.
With all that being said, I mean, different HMI systems, obviously, different designs, buying an EV. One thing that drives concern all over the world, I guess, is autonomous driving.
Yeah.
Now, it's obviously a sensitive topic for a lot. Also, my mom, because when I did research for this podcast, she said, I cannot imagine just cars driving by themselves. It just blows my mind. And I'll be mortally afraid to go outside. Now, you had this one question for me when we were talking about the podcast, and it said, is it ethical to market self-driving features as autonomous when really you still have to have your eyes on the road and also your hands on the wheel? And I read this article by Lisa Dixon the other day, and then shout out to my colleague Shrivas, who introduced me to her work. And she coined the term autono-washing. I don't know if you've heard this before.
I've heard it before, yes.
So basically, it describes the gap between the way automation is described to users and how it actually works. Now, is that something that you would also say that there's a big difference between what systems are capable of doing and what is presented to the outside or the public?
Yes, very much so. And I think this is where, and I can now talk about this because I'm employed by a university where we try to, a public university too, where we're very much encouraged to talk to the public about things like this. I think that often the way that it gets talked about, especially in fan bases, fully autonomous as well as self-driving technologies are typically not aligned with what people think they can actually do, because I think that they've been ingrained to think of movies They think of kind of, oh my gosh, they can just hop in the car and it can take me wherever I want. What and this is where I want to kind of call it Tesla again, because I think this is where they initially led, but then now they've actually faltered and actually dropped actually in their performance because of
Yeah.
the risks they've taken. So they marketed their I would say uh, hands-free driving or assisted driving even technology as full self-driving. They literally call it full self-driving. That is the actual name of the feature. It's not full self-driving. You actually are legally supposed to keep your hands still on the wheel, which is actually not as good as what Mercedes, what GM, and what Ford does. They are legally allowed to take their hands off the wheel because they have a computer monitor looking at the driver while they're driving. And then when you compare that to Cruise and Waymo, which are level 4 autonomy, they're within a certain mile radius. You can only travel within a certain area. So you can't just hop in and then drive to, hundreds of miles away, or even to a distant neighborhood outside the city limits. And even then, they get it wrong. I think part of the way that I think Cruise really marketed their self-driving ability is incredibly safe. And statistically speaking, it is far safer than any human driver. Unfortunately, it still makes mistakes that sometimes get in the news, such as what happened recently last week in San Francisco, where a self-driving vehicle dragged a pedestrian I think it was about a couple hundred feet after it hit them because it was trying to do the other safety thing, which was pull to a safe area of the road, because it was in the middle of the road and it basically kicked in and then dragged a person. And statistically speaking, though, those vehicles are far safer and have caused less accidents than human drivers have. And so when you think of the overall kind of acceptance, they can do that. But the way they've marketed it a little bit is I think, sometimes said it's completely safe. It'll never cause an accident, or they've at least implied that in some way. And I think this is where that's at least the perception. And I think that they've done still a fantastic job of saying, no, it's early technology. We're trying to work out the kinks, but the risks that we take far outweigh those safety concerns. And I think that those types of companies realize, and Cruise realizes that, no, this is incredibly new. This is incredible and can potentially be unsafe, and so they've taken those measures. But when you compare that to like major OEMs like Tesla, who are like, oh yeah, it's full self-driving, when in reality it's not, it can cause misperceptions and further accidents. I mean, you see all these YouTubers who are falling asleep at the wheel on purpose so they can just show off Tesla's technology, when that's incredibly unsafe. And so I think when you're trying to convince an older person to try it, you want to make sure you're there probably with them in the car, and to teach them and to kind of film them in their excitement, because it is kind of a fun moment. But I think automotive companies now are really feeling the heat from a legal standpoint to play it safe, to basically do their marketing right now and to change some of these labels they have, because people are getting hurt because they're reading one little thing and one little label of the name and then making decisions that they think are quote unquote safe when in fact they're not. And I think I want to give a shout out to Cruise, because I thought they handled the situation very well. I thought they did a great job handling that safety situation. Waymo has also done a great job with Google. But when you look at automotive companies like Tesla, where they put a name like full self-driving, when in fact it's nowhere near close to self-driving. In fact, Cruise and Waymo are far more advanced in their self-driving abilities than Tesla is. It's causing people to get hurt because they're taking unneeded risks, thinking that they can do stuff when in reality they can't. And I think that they will eventually add more disclaimers. They will add more confirmation messages. They will add more, because they're probably not going to change the name, but they're definitely going to add more like warnings saying, please keep on doing this. Please keep your hands on the wheel, like to basically protect themselves, to help educate drivers while they're using these products. Because yes, there is some I don't think it's malpractice, but I do think that it's, I think they're taking an incredibly unnecessary risk that they really don't have to do, just because of marketing, because it sounds cool.
So now that you're mentioning Tesla, a big or a large part of the research paper that I read was about Tesla, in fact, and just what you mentioned. So basically them advertising a system that didn't work the way they advertised it. And I read that they were, I mean, obviously you have a vehicle automation level 2, I think is currently the standard, right?
Yep.
Level 3 maybe.
It's level 2.
Working on level 3.
I would say Tesla's level 2. I would say what Mercedes is coming out with soon, I think you could argue is level 3.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Mercedes, Ford, GM, I'm trying to say, I think probably Land Rover, they're probably close to a level, they're level 2, maybe level 2.5, where
Mm-hmm.
you still have to pay attention to the road, but you can take your hands off the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
You could say that's like 2.5, but that's kind of like a made up number. There is no technically 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they're in between 2 and 3. And then you have things like um, Waymo and Cruise, which is technically level 4, where it's full self-driving. There is no steering wheel, and you can
Mm-hmm.
just ride around within a city limit.
Now, is that a problem that there is no regulation in terms? Because you just said level 2.5, or I think Tesla used level 2 plus, I believe. Now,
Yeah.
this doesn't actually exist. And obviously, people are going to take note of that and they're going to think that this is an actual level of safety that they can achieve. Now, what if something happens? Should OEMs be held responsible for accidents or for certain hazards or threats that can occur when using those systems?
Well, they can, and I'm fairly positive they have been under, and I'm sure I can't speak to any lawsuits that I know of, but I'm sure they've occurred. I would be highly surprised if they haven't yet. But they've definitely been legal. I'm sure there's been lawsuits happening with different safety concerns there. I just want to clarify something too, because I think a lot of listeners would like to know that when we refer to these levels of autonomy, it's not a
Hmm.
legal regulation. There's no there's this We're not describing a law.
Yeah.
We're simply describing a industry, I would say, term describing thresholds related to fully autonomous versus no autonomy at all. And there's a scale of 1 to 5. There are guidelines related to safety protocols, but they're not directly related to autonomous driving. So NHTSA is in the United States called the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. They're the governing body under the Department of Transportation, which is headed up by Pete Buttigieg. Shout out to the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Um, he also ran for president of the United States. Um, so the so NHTSA does instill laws that regulate certain types of infotainment design decisions. So the use of telltales, for one, is a really big one. Every automaker knows about telltales. Those are little icons that appear on the dash that nobody knows what they actually stand for. Those are federally regulated. There are no regulations that state how an autonomous driving system should work, in the sense that there's no UI that's specifically called out.
Hmm.
And I
Do you
think
think
this is
there
a
should be?
yes, absolutely. I think there should be yes. And the reason why is because, and this is where I wish that NHTSA would employ designers to kind of play into this, because I think NHTSA has failed when it comes to telltales because nobody knows what they mean. It is a universal icon standard, so they have published those icons, and OEMs have to do that. But I think now in the age of digital design with fully autonomous vehicle systems, we need to enhance that further, because I think OEMs, and I think Tesla being one of them, has used terminology and systems to cause too much risk. I'm not going to say if it's caused any direct deaths, but I will say it's definitely caused a bunch of YouTubers to do some experiments with it I should be illegal, like purposely falling asleep at the wheel or driving incredibly intoxicated because they're under the impression that the self-driving system can just take over. And I think there should be systems in place for them to do that. Now, from an automaker standpoint, there are safety reasons why, like if we can't detect a face, we shut down the vehicle eventually. Like if we can't detect emotion, there are ways we'd simply just pull the vehicle over slightly and shut off the car. And then, but there isn't a specific NHTSA guideline that says this needs to happen. And I think there should be, because I think we're getting in the age where performance vehicles and fully self-driving vehicles are now being more and more prolific, and I think NHTSA needs to stand up. Because yeah, I think people will continue to get hurt, especially in college towns too, by the way. We have actually, I think maybe a couple minutes ago, you saw like a white van driving in
Hmm.
my background. That was an autonomous vehicle by Maine
Oh,
Mobility. They're a startup here in Ann Arbor that does accessible, friendly, autonomous vehicles. And they're incredibly monitored by the city, by the standards in place because of all the different pedestrians walking. And yeah, I think there should be. I really do think that NHTSA should stand up and provide more HMI guidelines and expand on telltales, because that's been around now for 50 plus years, and I think there should be more now as it relates to autonomous driving.
I remember I read an article maybe a couple of weeks ago, there was an accident close to where I live, and for the longest time, rumors were going around that this was an autonomous vehicle, and no one was driving it, and this was the reason that the accident occurred in the first place, and it was a very bad accident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, obviously, rumors like that are gonna tarnish the trust that people have in those type
Absolutely.
of systems. Now, what can be done to reestablish that type of trust? Be more open about the systems, or be more transparent, or
Well, one thing that I think you can do now is publicize the crash data. Every country in the world has crash data. They have highway traffic safety data that they can publicize, where it's the number of accidents that have occurred, a number of deaths that have occurred from accidents. And they can just publicize that, because I guarantee the more autonomous features exist. And I will say this before I finish that sentence, I do want to comment. When you get to level one, a level one autonomy, things in that category include automatic braking. They include lane guidance systems, where it's that kind of nudge you feel in the steering wheel as you're going. That's technically a part of level one. Those have had amazing success of getting people more aware. And I think if you compare the crash data, you'll see a trend gradually going down, because more and more cars have those automatic braking features and lane guidance systems that's preventing accidents that have caused death. And so I think if you look at the one data point of automotive deaths, you will see probably a trend going down, and probably a direct correlation with more vehicles with automatic safety features that are being implemented. And so I think you'll see a direct correlation and a high statistical significance between those two data points. And I think that's what should be publicized. And I think that's how you can instill trust in people. I think another thing that you can do too to instill trust is to work and lobby insurance companies to lower insurance rates even further the more active safety features they have in the cars, which means that you're incentivizing people to trust vehicles with these features. And I think if you do that as well, it would also help that, because I think everybody's incentivized by money.
yeah, that's true. I just realized while you were talking that my car has a level 0
What? Wait, what car do you
automation.
drive? I should have asked this earlier. What car do you drive?
I drive a Mazda, and it's
A
13 years
Mazda.
old, and I have to do everything by
Nice.
myself.
So were you the person who got really into the Zoom Zoom commercials, like from like the early 2000s?
Absolutely not. I wrecked my first car and then had to get a new one.
Okay.
And that was
Okay.
the only reason I got it. I remember the
Okay.
commercial, but yeah, it was the first car I saw after I wrecked my old A-Class, the one that my brother had been driving years before, which was a very hard car to drive. But yeah, I've been driving it for 13 years, and now that
Good
you
for
mentioned
you.
level 1, yeah, I have a level 0.
Okay. There you go. There
Maybe
you
it's
go.
time for a new car. I don't know. Well,
Where's home, by the way? I meant to ask you this earlier. Which country do you call home?
Germany, Stuttgart.
Stuttgart. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Wait.
Have you-
Okay. So I got to. Okay, I have to ask this. The Ohio State connection. Where
you want to
Germany?
see the
Ohio.
mug again?
Okay. It's like burning a
Did you
hole
get?
through my heart.
Sorry.
For those listeners who are from Europe, Michigan and Ohio State are two universities in the Midwest. They are arguably probably one of the biggest sports rivalries in all of the United States. I'm talking like really heated sports
This is
rivalries.
next level, yeah.
This is next level. They're two colleges, very comparable in size and academic success, as much as I will hate to admit that.
You know,
You
we
think
both.
you think Michigan's higher academic
Well,
wise?
no, obviously not, but
But it's particularly heated this year because Michigan and Ohio State both have very good American football teams, and we always play the last game of the year, and it will most likely be for the third year in a row where Michigan and Ohio State are going to be like competing for basically a playoff spot, and it's going to be probably the most watched regular season game for the third year in a row.
by the way,
of all
when
of
is
college
that?
football.
Remind me, when is that?
Thanksgiving weekend.
Yes,
It
I'm going to be in the US and I'm going to be watching, actually.
Wow. It is. I think it's November 25th is the game.
Perfect. I'll be sitting there all jerseyed up.
So my house is in downtown Ann Arbor, and the stadium is about half a mile that way.
Nice.
So
Is it going to be in Michigan?
it's going to be in Michigan and Ann
Oh.
Arbor. Pretty exciting. And just so that everybody knows too, we love our stadiums. So just what's the largest stadium in Germany, like size-wise? How many people?
Germany, oh, might be Munich or Berlin. Oh no, is it Dortmund maybe? 69? Maybe
69,000.
Munich might be bigger, yeah. I'm not sure. For all the
So
soccer fans out there, I'm sorry.
just so you know, yeah. So the attendance for last year's Ohio State game, well, no, 2 years ago because it was Michigan. It was at Michigan 2 years ago. Was 125,000. So just for those listeners who want like a
Are you
size-wise
bragging?
comparison,
Are
I
you
am.
bragging at this point? Okay.
I am
Just
bragging.
making sure.
I'm also going to say this too. There's a good chance that Michigan beats Ohio State for the third year in a row.
How dare you?
Yes,
I
it's
do
going to
not
happen.
I do not know of the situation. I've never heard of it.
Anyway, so back to cars.
Yeah.
No, just out of curiosity, from a German perspective, who are some of the leaders in the HMI space? If you don't mind me asking you a question, when it comes like I don't get a chance to talk to I think professional European designers and like just about what their view is on who the HMI leaders are in the space.
I mean, I'm guessing definitely Mercedes-Benz, as always, BMW,
Okay.
Audi, so the big players, I guess. I do believe that a lot of brands have their specific niche in which they're, better than someone else in the industry, but I would always go with probably Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Audi,
Okay.
because I think those are the companies that everyone looks at if there's something new on the market.
Okay. Gotcha. Even with, like like the graphics and everything, your view is that those are the leaders, even when compared to the Asian and some of the other American brands like Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about all the infotainment systems I've seen on the database and doing onboardings, um, I would probably say that Audi has a more classic look.
Yeah,
It's
very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and BMW has a very specific look, I would say, in terms of
Yeah.
color code and that's just my opinion, obviously, right? Other people might disagree.
Yeah.
And Mercedes-Benz, I mean, my family has always been Mercedes-Benz, so I know all these systems. But I would say that Mercedes-Benz is probably, compared to Chinese systems, probably closest to those. But again, in terms of color coding and design, probably. But others might disagree. But I would say, I guess these three are the big players that everyone else kind of looks up to and see what they're doing. Porsche maybe as well, but I guess no
Yeah.
surprises.
So MBUX, which is, I think is that where Mercedes is still calling their
Yeah.
UX system is MBUX. So MBUX is something really interesting. When it first came out, and I was in the GM Global Design Studio, and we were using your system, screen system, to look at it and to look at all the screens. They doubled down on skeuomorphic design, which we didn't see coming. And especially with the large screens, it was incredibly graphic in the sense that there was a lot of color, a lot of drop shadow use, a lot of kind of three-dimensional representations.
Hmm.
And I can only speak for myself though, but I know that this was shared by a lot of other designers. We did not see that coming.
Hmm.
We honestly thought that Germans would stick to the very simplistic, I would say, Braun style of design, which is
Hmm.
just a lot of use of lines, no drop shadow, no depth. I think Audi still kind of very much does this.
Yeah.
And so that was a big surprise to us, and it definitely influenced a lot of designs going forward. And I guess were you surprised at that design approach where they added a lot of depth to this? I mean, do you feel like that was dated? Do you feel like that was forward thinking? I really I've actually always wanted to ask a German this because I don't I would love to hear the local perspective.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm just speaking for myself. If someone
Of
in the
course, yeah.
auto industry might have a very different opinion of that, um, I guess they were trying to do something different, than from what people might have expected. Probably also looking at Chinese systems. I have to say, for a lot of those systems, I do think they have a lot of depth to them. So you have to click a lot of buttons until you get where you want to get or where you want to go ultimately, which I personally don't like that much, but everyone's obviously has a different opinion about this. But I will say that I guess it was kind of a surprise that they changed the system like that.
Okay,
But yeah,
gotcha.
it did look
Interesting.
different than it did before.
For sure. Um, Well, I would say pivoting back to a little bit the Ohio State Michigan conversation. You'd be happy to know that because the UAW was just solidified, those agreements and those documents were all signed.
Hmm.
Ohio, I think, maintained, I think, their production facilities, and now Michigan and Ohio have become kind of this hub. I think a little bit of manufacturing, which has been which I was actually really proud of. I have to admit, I'm really proud of the fact that the UAW was able to solidify some of those agreements. As much as the cost might play a factor in future developments, I do want to give a kudos to the state of Ohio when trying to solidify that kind of stuff because I'm glad to see the manufacturing stay. I'll put it that way. That was
Obviously,
something that
yeah.
I mean, it's just for jobs and stuff like that too. And seeing jobs go to Mexico or Canada is, I think, especially for the middle class, I think it's hard to watch. But
Hmm.
I think, especially in the Midwest, we always have a pride in manufacturing, even though we're not really known for it. I don't think there's definitely that pride for it, and so especially in the automotive industry, I'm really happy that that was solidified because, yeah, I think it's just a very proud moment. I think
Okay, shout out to both states then.
exactly, exactly.
No, of course that's good. Obviously, keeping the industry in your country, in your state, obviously makes a lot of difference also for the people living there and just for the
Yeah,
entire infrastructure and industry.
yeah. Yeah, the big thing that I think really rattled the automotive industry, especially with this advent of UX and OTA stuff, is the idea that this huge growth of I think kind of the voice of the worker. I think has really been since COVID at least has really also rocked the automotive industry more than it ever has before. Um, I think unions now have become a shaping force in how cars are designed now because cost has now become even more of a
Hmm.
driver. And so, going back to your question too, and because I thought about this too, going back to your question of technology and adoption, I think more emphasis is now placed on cost more than anything else. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people are willing to give up technology if they know that their cost is still being maintained
Yeah.
because they know that this car employs tens of thousands of people that are giving them payable, livable wages. And now that it's become incredibly synonymous with certain brands. And and so because of that synonymous with certain brands, there's more of a loyalty and less of an adoption to more advanced technologies that may cost more money because they know that the customer knows that they are supporting a company that supports union workers or
Hmm.
supports a workforce that they identify with. And so I think that's also a reason why that in the United States we've been less inclined to adopt more expensive technologies because we simply want to support brands
Hmm.
that have a lower cost, but also have because it costs less to manufacture because they're putting that money instead of in technology, they're putting that money into paying a fair wage for workers. And I think that is also going to be a huge shaping force now in the next 10 years as you're seeing more and more EVs with more technology come out. Is I think you're going to see some brands lag behind a little bit simply because of the fact that they're diverting funds from technology innovation to paying people a fair and livable wage. So,
Is that something that you think might ultimately convince people to buy a specific brand then?
oh, it does right now. I mean, I don't know how this goes in Germany, but people support certain brands simply because of the fact that they do hire union workers. There's also just similar to Michigan, Ohio State. There's Ford versus Chevrolet, or there's Ford
Hmm.
versus GM. Very much so where their family has always had a certain type of brand and they want to support it. But I also know from a workforce standpoint now, people are not buying Teslas for the simple reason that Elon Musk is incredibly anti-union. Not because they don't
Okay.
necessarily align with his political beliefs in other areas, but simply because of the fact that he does not support union workers, they will not buy a Tesla. And I think that is now becoming a very big motivation for people wanting to buy certain technologies. And the reason why Elon doesn't want to do that is because he wants to maintain his margins, but he also wants to invest more in technology because that's incredibly expensive. And he wants to take that money and invest it with more programmers and more innovative ways to make the car autonomous. And so I think that's also what's going to drive people is that they're going to be willing to give up some of the technology innovation to support a brand that gives a fair and livable wage to workers.
Hmm. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously that has always been Tesla's shtick a little bit. I think A lot of new technology, trying things out, being the first one to try things out and then to see where it goes and impressing people because you're actually daring to do something new.
What I find fascinating about automotive industries too, and I'm a bit of a history buff, and I was an undergrad I took a bunch of history classes for fun, and I actually love how the automotive industry has sometimes shaped world history. Um, so, and, going back as far as World War One, even, and then even into World War Two, every automaker did some very, I would say, not even unethical, but like very heinous stuff.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
I won't even mention the Germans. I will just start from an American standpoint. Like I won't even.
Sorry, we
No,
weren't
I won't even.
involved.
Yeah, exactly. You guys were on vacation during World War II. It's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No. From an American standpoint, General Motors, the day before Pearl Harbor, sold Nazi Germany cars. That is a documented thing that happened, and the only reason why they didn't was because the War Department forced all American companies to cease selling to enemies of the state. The General Motors CEO then went on record and said, "We don't like to involve ourselves in issues that don't affect the company," in response to World War II. And because he said it was too small of an issue to affect the global company, because at the time General Motors was still one of the largest, if not the largest company in the world. And then Ford, Henry Ford, I won't even, it's very well documented he was a very large anti-Semitic, but his vehicles and his bombing of manufacturing prowess did a lot of stuff for World War II as well. And so as we're seeing this now, you're seeing these CEOs, again, kind of come up and affect world history. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love this industry so much is that even if they don't realize it, they are affecting world history. I think, Elon Musk, for example, using the money he made from his automotive company to then buy Twitter, and some would argue dismantle it, and to dismantle public discourse on a moderated platform like what Twitter was, I think will be documented in some way in world history. The ex-CEO of Nissan already has a Netflix documentary made about him. Movies now, or multiple movies have come up now about, Ferrari and what he did. And I think that as we look back on this too, we're going to see more movies coming out about what's happening right now in the automotive industry, about what's happening with, I think specifically what's the example, what happened with Rivian and the birth of Rivian. I think that'll be a very interesting movie if it ever gets made. I also hope too that as we get into more of this interconnected world order, you're going to see much more collaboration between what the Japanese are doing with their hydrogen fuel cells and also electric technology, but then also you're seeing what the Chinese are doing with their technology and their infotainment systems proliferate into other American brands. One of my favorite cars, actually, which actually makes a decent amount of money for GM, is I'm going to butcher the name, but it's a logo it's a dragon that's red, and it looks like a bird doing this with its kind of wings slant up, and it's Wuling. Okay. I think it's Wuling, Wuling, I think. It's a two-person car, okay. And it sells for roughly about $8,000 US. Oh, wow. And is the most popular EV in China. And it has been done more for EV adoption than any other car in China. Its infotainment system is an analog radio. That is this. That's all you
need. That's all I have.
No, I'm serious. No, and you know what? A UX designer did that. And I think a lot of people, when they envision HMI design, they think you have to do all this grandiose stuff. You have to have this huge monitor, this huge tablet mounted on the dash. And no, you're still designers making these knobs that can still be contextual when modifying an analog screen that's roughly about this big. And that's helping EV adoption and helping the world be more economically friendly than any other, I think, Tesla. Because it's affordable, people use it their day to day. It's reduced pollution for commuters. I think it has a range of 150 miles. But for a car the size of a golf cart, that's incredibly affordable. I think it does the trick. And
it's enough to drive to Whole Foods.
Exactly. It is enough to drive to Whole Foods. It is enough to drive to the supermarket. It is enough to drive to class for college students. I think you'll start seeing them here in the United States more, especially in college towns, driving to and from because of harsh weather. And I hope that's where the automotive industry goes, because I think that's what will make the biggest difference. And when I was a part of the affordable EV program at GM, those are the conversations we were having. And that was the most exciting time to be a part of that team, because we were trying to figure out the best way to save money and to truly design experiences that were not just to show off or not just to get marketing or a Super Bowl ad, but to make like, no, if we do this, we can sell this, we can manufacture like potentially this many cars at cost. Like this will bring the overall cost down if we do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it wasn't the sexiest. It wouldn't make a great portfolio piece, but
Gets the job
no,
done.
it gets the job done. And you know that the person sitting next to you can easily buy it and they will love it because of a certain thing you specialized in. And so what I hope what happens with the EV market and the car market is that affordable electric vehicles and hydrogen and as well as hybrid vehicles will specialize in doing one thing or two things really well, and then kind of be okay with the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll finish this rant up with real quick. I think what the Ford Maverick did and what the latest affordable truck from Toyota is going to do too is they said, you know what? Because this car can do a lot of things really well, but one thing it can't do very well, even though it's a truck, is tow, because the car is so small and the engine's so small. But people who have this small of truck are probably not going to tow anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hybrid. It gets amazing fuel mileage. You can still throw a TV and an air mattress in the back of it. So for the average college student who's probably not going to tow anyway, it's amazing. And that's then they realized it's been incredibly successful for Ford, and Toyota saw that, and they're coming and they just released their initial designs for their affordable truck as well. And so that's the market I'm excited about. That's the one that I'm looking at and being like, yes, that is really going to make a difference. It's not going to be, the ridiculously expensive vehicle from Mercedes. It's not going to be some really tech-savvy vehicle from China, or the next Model S or the next Tesla Roadster. It's going to be those vehicles that I think are going to be massively adopted, and people have fun with it. So that's the stuff I'm really excited about.
And now, as an excited UX designer, what skills do you think new designers need to get a job at an OEM?
Oh, I love
Just
that
give me a
question.
couple of bullet points. What do you think is absolutely necessary?
So I'll start with the ones that are kind of like the no BS, like you just need this. You need to learn how to use design software. Like you're going to need to they need to hire you to basically produce something. So you need to go to school or get a certificate or go take online classes to learn how to do the hard skills, like actually create design deliverables. The next one though is they're going to be the soft skills, which are even harder to learn. Good communication, being empathetic, and being a good listener. Those are the next ones in line that I think are incredibly important. You have to make sure that you understand that you are not your user. You are not the person you're designing for. You also have to understand too that this is not your design. One of the things I tell students that I think is hard for them to understand a lot is that whatever you design is not owned by you. It is owned by the company that is paying for you. Legally, this is not like an opinion. This is a fact. This is a legal fact.
Mm-hmm.
If you are employed by a company, they own your design. Therefore, if you just go into it with that thinking, it's everybody's design because you all are trying to make it better. So the more feedback and the more critiques you get, the more comments you get that are positive or negative, they're everybody's because the company owns it. You don't own it. You are simply delivering it. And so going back to the soft skills, that's what I would say. The third thing I would say too is you have to do things that are fun. You go on podcasts like this, go to an auto show. Oh my gosh, Europeans are so much better at auto shows, and the Chinese are so much better at auto shows than the Americans now. It's sad too. I hate to admit that. They're kind of a dying breed now, the auto shows in America. But I went to an auto show in Belgium when I was in undergrad, actually. It was a purely happenstance kind of thing. I was blown away. I had grown up going to auto shows in Detroit, and I was blown away at what I saw when I was in Belgium, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it, and I really want to go to one in China because they take it to the next level. And I would say do stuff that's fun. Enjoy the industry. Go to marketing commercial shoots if you get that opportunity. They're like movie sets. It's so cool. Go to the parties, go to the events that really inspire you. At GM, I had the wonderful opportunity to go to the very first global design studio where Eero Saarinen designed something that is now a historical landmark but it was now a very famous design studio. And I got to sit and see where the original Corvette was designed and where basically some of the models that shaped kind of the world design order in the 50s and 60s were made. Do the kind of stuff you geek out on. For some, General Motors thought it was a great idea to also do the Transformers movie, but seeing that and seeing the results of that were kind of fun too. But that was not as cool as going to the original museums. But yes, if that is fun for you, please do it. There's so much cool stuff in this space to get excited about. Please do it. And I think that's the third thing I would say. So hard skills first, then soft skills. Work on those. Empathetic. Learning to listen, acknowledging that these are not your designs, and then third is have fun.
So for all the students out there listening, go with these things and you're going to be a very successful UX designer.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now I have two final questions. Are you going to be in Las Vegas at is it the CES, right? Is that what it's called?
CES in January?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the school to send me. Yeah, I don't know for sure yet, but I would love to go. I'm gonna try to go if the school will let me and pay for it.
I'll probably be there as well. So see you there.
That sounds
maybe.
Good. Yeah, no, for sure. Are you guys gonna have a booth in Vegas?
I don't think so. No, just really looking around. Yeah.
Okay. I will definitely let you know if I end up going. I know there's the huge HMI conference though in California, the automotive HMI though. So that one I'm going to be at. I think HMI Automotive, I think is what it is, and I think I have a bunch of colleagues who are going to be there. So that one I will be, and I think that one's in March. I think.
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, that one I have to look it up. But yes, I'll let you know for sure if I'm going to be in Vegas.
Perfect. And the second and more important question: who's going to win the game?
Ooh. Well, obviously Michigan. The question is by if it's 30 or 40 points.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so I think I should check my phone because I think Harbaugh might get suspended. For those of you who don't know, Michigan has been accused of cheating for sign stealing, is what they're calling it.
It's not a surprise.
You still got to block. Is what I'm just telling you that right now. You still got to physically tackle somebody. I don't know if that's, but no. So I think our head coach might be suspended soon, and I think that'll play into it as well. I'm excited because I think it'll be a close game. I obviously think Michigan will win, but I think it'll be closer than a lot of people think, and it'll probably be the most watched. Here's my prediction. Here's a better prediction. How about this? I think the Michigan-Ohio State game will be the most watched college football game ever this year.
Oh, wow. Those are some big words.
I think the University of Michigan versus Ohio State will be the most watched college football regular season game ever.
Well, let's see about that.
So I think it'll break a bunch of records because of all the drama surrounding it and the fact that it'll pretty much determine who goes to, the playoff and probably will win the national championship game. Yeah, for those who are listening, Ohio State's ranked number 1. Michigan is 3rd? I think Michigan's 3rd.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's probably by the end of the season, it'll probably be Ohio State 1, Michigan number 2, because I think we'll beat Penn State this weekend. So therefore, we'll move up one spot. So it'll be number 1 versus number 2.
Perfect. Now, I think your Bo has already left the chat.
Oh, no,
so.
she disappeared. Oh, no, she's right there. She's on the ground.
Oh,
there she is.
Hi. So this is also the perfect place to stop. I'm going to let you go, Jim. I want to say thank you so much for this podcast. It's been a very interesting 90 minutes. I didn't even notice the time passed so fast. So
I know, it's crazy.
Thank you so much. And maybe see you in January and definitely watch the game.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.